Fred, thanks very much, and thanks for all of you inviting me and welcoming me. I really do appreciate it. As Fred indicated, there are some within agriculture who take a dim view of the Humane Society of the United States. Some of those folks are blaming us for the drought. There are some folks who blame us for the Dust Bowl, but we were formed about 20 years after the Dust Bowl. So I'm again really looking forward to this discussion today and hearing your questions and engaging in dialogue. You know, as Fred said, you know, we took a look at some materials. We've been concerned about the misuse of checkoff programs in general, and I think that we've got a lot of common ground. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Humane Society of the United States and what we're working on. I'm really glad, of course, to be with Joe Maxwell, who is our Director of Rural Development and Outreach at HSUS, and has been involved with OCM for many years and been involved with humane and sustainable agriculture, he and his family, for obviously for decades. I'm delighted that some of our new Farmers and Ranchers Council members are here. Kevin Fulton from Nebraska, and of course your VP Mike Callicrate, Jim Kanopic from Nebraska. We're really grateful to all of these folks for educating us, speaking about these issues, and kind of bridging this gap or this divide that has so, for so many years prevented good and proper communications and collaboration on these issues. So I'm particularly grateful to them, and again, really looking forward to more and more collaboration, more and more discussion on these issues. You know, I wrote a book that was published last year called The Bond, and the subtitle is Our Kinship with Animals, Our Call to Defend Them. And one of the theses of my book is that we humans have throughout all time shared a bond and a connection with other creatures. And you can look throughout the entire arc of the human experience and see this bond that has existed between us and animals. It's had different manifestations in different times. Of course, for the vast majority of human history, we've been non-agricultural or pre-agricultural societies. But even these tribal societies that lived by hunting and gathering had a connection to animals. According to so much of the anthropological literature, of course, our study of surviving tribal societies today, the people in these communities had a deep knowledge of all the animals in the forest. When they killed animals for survival, they had rituals of atonement, apology to the animals. They thought they would come back as animals, and to do harm to animals or to be malicious or to take life lightly would result in the animals not making themselves available for the people in the future. And of course, you know, one of the great junctures in human history was domestication. You know, 10,000 years ago or 15,000 years ago, originally with the wolf becoming the dog, and then a series of different species being domesticated. This is arguably the greatest juncture in human history. And with domestication of plants and animals, we see more sedentary sort of living. We see people accumulating food. We see the rise of communities, eventually cities and states. And you can take a look at the population growth throughout history and see, of course, it dramatically rises with domestication. And there are some who might say domestication, you know, is a form of subjugation of animals, and we began to control every aspect of the animals' lives. But I would argue that in most respects, it's a kinship, and it's an association between humans and animals. And there has always been a notion of custodianship and stewardship built into that relationship. And that was, of course, for these 10,000 years, the dominant way that we interacted. And it's only in our modern industrial, technological society where we have often become very alienated from animals. And you can look at kind of the history of the settlement of the United States. As we began moving away from an agrarian economy and an agrarian culture, and we began to populate the newly emerging cities of this nation in the 19th century, that's when you saw a rise in pet keeping. It's when you saw the emergence of parks, whether they were cities or even national parks, to allow people in the cities to reconnect with animals. Because we've always been connected with other creatures. And you might look at the rise of the humane movement in the 19th century. It was certainly a reaction to abuses of the horse in the cities. It was also a reaction, along with the environmental and conservation movements, to the kind of destruction of the natural world, the slaughter of the buffalo, the slaughter of the passenger pigeon. But you can also see it as an attempt to kind of reclaim this notion of a proper bond between humans and animals. And of course, fast forward to the last 50 years, and we saw the rise of this new industrial model of animal production, and the separation between humans and animals, and some might say the alienation of humans and animals on these large industrialized facilities. And the Humane Society was formed in 1954, so it really predates the development of this industrial model. But even in the 1950s, the Humane Society had kind of a broad sort of philosophical approach of caring for all animals. And it was HSUS that really emerged to fight for the adoption of the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, which was enacted in 1958. And we've always had a concern for animals in the food production system. Now we're just much more concerned about what happens at the earliest stages of that process, not just in slaughter, which is the end of the animals' lives, not just in transport, but on the farm itself. And really, what we have offered is not, sort of notion that all animal agriculture is bad, but really quite the opposite. That's the false framing that has been offered by critics of ours who resist even the most modest reform efforts that we advance. They don't want to debate and discuss some of the issues that we raise. So they say, well, these guys just want to end all animal agriculture. And the reality is, if you look at the specific things that we've been engaged in, we've tried to curb the worst abuses of the industrial production model and transport and slaughter. And that's really, I think, Fred, what lands us here with you today and with Mike and Brother Dave Andrews and all of you who are thinking about this entire model of agriculture and what it means for you as individuals and what it means for us as a society. Our mission statement at HSUS is celebrating animals, comma, confronting cruelty. We celebrate the place of animals in our lives, in our communities. We celebrate wild animals in their native habitats. We celebrate pets in the household. We celebrate farmers who are examining the relationship with animals and being proper custodians and stewards of those animals, who are showing that a bond exists, that the notion that animal husbandry and animal care is central to that relationship. And that's not just a production unit, it's not just science and reductionism, that there's something kinetic about that bond. And we work on, obviously, a broad range of issues. We've changed the legal framework in this country, seeing animal cruelty treated as a broad problem, a serious problem, Now 48 states have felony level penalties for malicious acts of cruelty to animals, because there's so much evidence that's reflected in the sociological literature that if you can engage in malicious mistreatment of animals, you're probably not a safe citizen in our society. That it's really about a misuse of power, that people are taking advantage of these animals. And we see an incredible connection between malicious mistreatment of animals and other criminal behavior and violence toward people. It's why we've changed the legal framework on dog fighting, and now that's a felony in every state. And why we work against cockfighting, finally banning that activity in the last couple of states where it was legal, in New Mexico and in Louisiana. And here in Missouri, it was legal until 1998 when we did a ballot measure to curb that practice. And we work on a wide range of issues. We're really an organization that focuses, as I said, on all animals. We've got program departments devoted to companion animals, equine, wildlife and habitat protection, animal testing and research, and farm animal protection as well. You know, the New York Times had an editorial not too long ago. It was talking about our campaigns against battery cage confinement of laying hens and gestation crate confinement of breeding sows in the pig industry. And the Times said, industrial confinement is cruel and senseless, and will turn out to be, we hope, a relatively short-lived anomaly in modern farming. You know, that really does capture our view that things have skidded off the tracks in terms of this industrial model and this incredible separation between the keepers of these animals and the animals themselves. I mean, how do you possibly care for thousands, tens of thousands, millions of animals on some of these industrialized factory farms? I mean, there's no relationship whatever. This is population management. There's not a connection between the keeper, the owner of those animals, and the animals themselves. And you know, it really is a question of the misuse of power. You know, we don't talk about animal rights at HSUS. We talk about human responsibility. It's really more about us than it is about them. We've got all the power in this relationship. We can destroy animals, we can crush them, we can wipe entire species from the planet. I mean, we did it in the 19th century, destroying the billions of passenger pigeons, bringing the buffalo to the precipice of extinction. Only 500 survived, only because the first national park was created, Yellowstone National Park, in the early 1870s as a singular refuge for the animals. I mean, that was then. Imagine now with all of the advances in technology and all the innovations. I mean, animals are at our mercy. And how we treat the weak and the vulnerable says so much about us as individuals, and it says so much about us as a society. And there are people who try to say, oh, well, the Humane Society should just be concerned about dogs and cats. Well, those people don't understand that we have always been concerned about all animals. And we're not just concerned about those animals that we know. Of course, we love our pets. And you know, we're an organization of pet lovers and pet keepers. And it's, of course, understandable that people would have a deep connection to the animals who were in their lives. But we want people to be concerned about all animals, even animals very far removed from them in the supply chain. I mean, of course, the biggest use of animals in our society is the use of animals in agriculture. More than 9 billion animals sent to slaughter every year. How that happens for those animals during production and transport for slaughter matters to those animals. And it should matter to every one of us, because the basic precept is so well established that cruelty to animals is wrong. I mean, I don't find many people debating that notion. It's codified in the law in all 50 states. As I said, it's a felony for certain malicious acts like dogfighting in every state. That's a universal value. That notion is established. The question for us now is, how do we apply anti-cruelty principles in a world where animal use is so widespread? I mean, do we say it just applies to dogs and cats? Does it just apply to them and to wildlife? No. Any sensible assessment of what's going on in our society is that people care about all animals. Anti-cruelty principles don't just apply to some, they apply to all. And it's validated by every survey that we've done, and it's validated by the fact that animals are part of our lives. 2/3 of American households have pets. We've got 171 million dogs and cats who live in our homes. 80 million of us are active wildlife watchers. We've got nature programming on television. We've got this legal framework that exists. Wouldn't it be absurd to think, well, we don't care about those animals? And then the public has notions of what's appropriate when it comes to agriculture. They see images of animals on pasture. They see a farmer who exhibits tender concern for the animals. And then you see a gestation crate operation, and you see sows, for as long as the eye can see, confined in cages that are 2 feet wide by 7 feet long, that don't allow the animal to do anything but take 1 half step forward and 1 half step back. They can't even lay down without hanging out of the side of the crate. And these are living, feeling beings. And the public doesn't think, oh, well, because they're pigs and because they're used for food production, well, that doesn't matter. Who cares about them? When they see what's going on with these animals, they don't want any part of it. They don't find it acceptable to treat animals in this way. And we are connecting people to the decisions in their daily lives, their food choices, which has consequences up and down the supply chain. And we think that's the right and proper debate for us to be having in society. But if we don't have people doing it the right way, exhibiting that bond, and exhibiting a connection and concern for animals on the farm, then there's no alternative. And then you're just grousing and carping without any real option. And moral issues take on greater resonance when there are options in the marketplace. When people do have choices, and they make choices based on their values and their deepest concerns. One of the concentration areas that we have had on animal agriculture issues is this extreme confinement. Dealing with pigs in crates or veal calves in crates or laying hens in battery cages. I mean, it seems very basic to me that animals built to move should be allowed to move. Animals with legs and wings should be allowed to use them. And to confine them so severely that they can't even turn around is a moral problem that should concern every one of us. And it should outrage every farmer who exhibits a proper bond and connection with animals. And it, of course, should outrage every consumer. We were at odds with the egg industry. We were fighting them. We did Prop 2 in California to stop the extreme cage confinement of laying hens on these enormous egg operations. And we had legal actions, and we were talking to corporations about buying cage-free eggs. And the egg industry approached us and said, well, we'd like to talk. We'd like to figure out a way where we can improve animal welfare, but also provide certainty and security for farmers for the generation ahead. And my response was, thank you. Let's have that discussion. We want to have that discussion. And we're not going to have the perfect be the enemy of the good. We want progress in society on these issues. So over 4 months, with Joe very involved in these discussions with the egg industry, we made an agreement. It's not perfect from our perspective, but it's a recognition that these industries, even some of the most concentrated, industrialized sectors of agriculture, must exhibit a conscious concern for animals. And now we're working in the Congress to codify the terms of the agreement to substantially increase space allotments for the birds, to ban starvation-based molting, to limit ammonia levels, and to provide the consumer with information so he or she can make better choices in the marketplace, labeling products, that give them more information about the way that the animals are treated. And you know, I thought it would be easy, you know, going to Congress with the big stakeholders agreeing on a pathway forward, but the beef industry and the pork industry, even though they have no economic stake in the issue, are standing in the way because they want no progress. The NCBA and the National Pork Producers Council are the lead groups fighting this legislation to codify improved standards for laying hens and to provide economic security for these agricultural producers. I mean, who's really the voice against animal agriculture? Those are the people who are fighting animal agriculture done in a more responsible way. Those are the same groups that opposed the GIPSA rule when we were backing it. Those are the same groups that opposed COOL when we were backing that as well. Who are the real opponents here? You know, leveling the playing field was one of the key ingredients of our deal with the United Egg Producers. I mean, having fairness. That's why we got involved in the GIPSA fight. That's why we got involved in the COOL issues. Fairness, access to information. These things matter in our society. And providing markets for farmers who are doing it a better way. I mean, Americans are going to continue to eat meat. And how consumers make their choices has enormous consequences for farmers, and it has enormous consequences for the animals. So we've been trying to drive the market by connecting consumers to these decisions. And you know, there are a lot of criticisms of big companies like McDonald's and Cisco and other major food retailers, but we've got to have these companies recognizing that these issues matter to the American public. And just this year, we've seen McDonald's make a commitment to phase out procurement of pork over time from operations that confine the sows. We got Burger King to make a similar commitment. Wendy's, Denny's, Cracker Barrel, Costco, Sodexo, Cisco, a laundry list of companies just this year, which validates the notion that major food retailers are taking heed of what the American public is saying about the limits that must exist in agriculture. That the animals are not just a bunch of cogs in a machine. They're not just meat, milk, and egg producing bodies. They feel and they think. And that our age-old connection to animals, this bond that's been built into us for all of human history, and our modern-day standards against cruelty, along with our biblically based standards of mercy and decency, that all of these things matter in a civil society. That's really the role that HSUS, plays in the society.
Okay.
Not just to look at one metric, which is concern for animals, but to see how that fits in society, and to find new ways forward that build a humane economy. You know, when you separate your economic institutions from your values, you get some pretty terrible outcomes. I mean, historically, that's an example, slavery is an example of that. Just, treating a race of people in a big part of the country as chattel, just to drive productivity. Child labor is a great example of this as well. I mean, conscripting kids into labor, working them 14 or 16 hours a day. I mean, a country founded on the principles of justice and fairness, opposition to tyranny. I mean, you can't have slavery and child labor in a society that has these values and concerns. Well, you can't, in this society now, building upon those traditions, and now with a legal framework that calls us to be decent to animals. You can't disassociate our economic institutions from our values about animals. That's what factory farming is. I mean, it's just a disassociation of economics from values. We've got to infuse our economic institutions with the values that have animated the country for more than 200 years. I mean, what a terrible thing. That's what makes our country great, is we care about values. And we care about economics. And the humane economy is grounded on the integration of those ideas. We were the greatest whaling nation in the world. You know, the boats took off from Nantucket and New Bedford, plied the world's oceans to kill humpback whales and fin whales and sperm whales. And now those whaling ships have been deconstructed, and now we have whale watching boats that value these animals, and a much bigger industry, whale watching, $2 billion a year in whale watching. We've taken the raw and naked exploitation of an animal and then turned a new economy, a humane economy, grounded upon appreciation of the animals. Well, we need humane and sustainable agriculture in this country because these values matter to us. And we've got a short video I'd like to show you that talks about some of the farmers that we're working with and infusing these values into the enterprise of agriculture, as all of you have known instinctively and intuitively. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm very grateful.